Hi, my name is Ginny. I read Thomas Dunaway's Pioneering for Jesus, The Life of Henrietta Hall Shuck. Henrietta was the first female missionary to China. Henrietta was born in 1817 in rural Virginia. When Henrietta was only 13, her teacher asked where she would be in 100 years. The question stuck with Henrietta, and she soon committed her life to Christ. A few months later, Henrietta's mother passed away when she was only 14. Henrietta missed her mother dearly, but she lived by her mother's last words to prove faithful to her Creator and to meet her in heaven. Henrietta's father was also dear to her. Thomas Dunaway wonders if anyone ever had as much influence as Henrietta's father had over her. Interestingly, her father at 37 committed to full-time ministry the same year that Henrietta committed to overseas missions when she was only 16. She wondered how she was going to be a missionary, but she didn't wonder for long. Shortly after she committed to going, she met J. Hugh Lewis Shuck, who was a seminary student in Richmond. After being accepted as a missionary, he asked Henrietta to marry him. They were married September 8, 1835, and just a few days later, they set sail for appointment in Boston on September 22nd. They were appointed to be the first missionaries to set up a mission in China. They first traveled 19,000 miles by ship to Calcutta so that they could drop off other missionaries in the area. They were hoping to meet Adoniram Judson, but he was busy. They were able to go to the graveside of Anne Judson, whose writings had greatly influenced both of them. Shortly after arriving, they then took off to Singapore. They would spend 5 months in Singapore doing language study, first studying Malay and then starting Chinese. After that, they set out for Macau in China, where they started working. They also began to take in orphans during this time. Henrietta had a desire to teach Chinese girls, since many of them were not able to be educated, since most of the people in the area thought that they were not worth educating. She schemed to find ways that people would allow the girls to come to be educated. But even when they were allowed, they were often taken away earlier than they were supposed to be. One family accepted the dowry for their daughter that was offered to them when she was only 14 by an opium addict, and then had her feet bound before she was married. The Shucks also had other difficulties. They were constantly struggling with sickness. But more difficult, they had so many issues with the board. It took 9 months to send a letter from America to China and from China to America, and there was a lot of confusion. For years, they thought the Shucks were being disobedient and the board wouldn't send sufficient funds. The family drained their personal finances to stay in China and survived by renting a small drafty room. They went out without things like milk or butter until finally a reliable missionary from Asia was able to go back to Boston and help them understand what was going on. Shortly after the confusion was settled, they moved to Hong Kong. Immediately, they were offered land from the governor, and they had their first Chinese land in all of China that was owned by Protestants. Within 6 months, the Shucks had built 3 chapels. They built their own house. They started building schools for girls and boys, and they began having a wide influence. Just after 6 months, they already had 33 services a week going. The Shucks also really struggled with sickness. Henrietta really struggled, really from the time she left. I mean, they spent almost a year on a boat. She was sick most of the time. And then just off and on with their children. During their during their 4th child's pregnancy, she almost died. They weren't sure if she was going to make it. But then miraculously, after the child was born, her health started to improve. They were really excited until Henrietta just started sharing with her family that she didn't think she would make it through the year. And after about 6 months of health, Henrietta told her husband that she was feeling ill, and they began to pray together. They called for the doctor, but within a few hours, Henrietta had passed away. Though she was only 27 when she died, she changed the lives of a lot of people. She was extremely faithful to her Savior. She lived a life of self-denial and really changed the life of many, many Chinese people. Henrietta led a life of self-sacrifice. She suffered a lot through illness, through seeing how mistreated Chinese young girls were, and even at the hands of other believers. Eventually the board settled things, but there were years of pain that she endured that were never known to her family and other friends that she wrote letters to. She definitely has a legacy that's worth emulating and that we can learn a lot from today.